Seems to be a lot of people talking about a leaky gut, but there is in fact something else that's quite similar known as a leaky blood-brain barrier that deserves a lot more attention. And so in this video, I'm going to dive deep into what causes a leaky blood-brain barrier and some of the potential treatments and protocols to help reverse a leaky blood-brain barrier. So for those of you who are brand new to my channel, my name is Lucas. I'm the founder of Ergogenic Health, and my mission is quite simple. It is to bring you the most cutting edge health information that you can't find on Google. So please do me a favor, like this video, hit subscribe, and if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below as I do my best to respond to each and every single one. So essentially in this video, we will unpack what a blood-brain barrier actually is, some of the potential symptoms and signs, and then also have a look at some potential treatments and modalities to help rectify this conditions. Firstly, here we can see what is a blood-brain barrier. You can see a cross-section of the blood vessel in the brain, and you can also see the junctions between these endothelial cells that actually line and protect the brain from harmful pathogens, bacteria, proteins. And so what its major role is quite similar to the gut barrier or the intestinal lining, is to protect the brain against, various toxins and harmful compounds. Now, one key point to note is that the blood-brain barrier is not always sealed. It allows certain molecules to pass through it, but it really needs to be on high alert to prevent the entry of harmful compounds and pathogens into the brain. So now let's take a look at some of the causes of a leaky blood-brain barrier. Certain bacterial infections can deteriorate the blood-brain barrier, and it can actually allow bacteria into the brain where they do not belong, and they can cause all sorts of bizarre and weird neurological symptoms. We also have mold toxins, which can also trigger inflammation, promote oxidative damage in the brain, and disrupt blood-brain barrier itself. We have excess glutamate, which is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter, which can overstimulate nerve cells, causing the blood-brain barrier to break down and increase its permeability to potentially harmful agents. Free radicals, these are released following high-intensity exercise, EMF exposure, heavy metal exposure. So free radicals can benefit the inflammatory response and accelerate the aging process, further deteriorating the blood-brain barrier. We have high blood sugar and diabetes, so high insulin can also impair the blood-brain barrier. Elevated homocysteine, which many of you will probably correlate that with red meat consumption, and homocysteine can be a risk factor and also can cause changes in the tight junction of the cells in the brain and sort of disrupts that blood-brain barrier integrity. A high-fat, high-calorie diet and obesity can increase oxidative damage. A low oxygen environment, so hypoxia, can damage the blood-brain barrier. Liver damage, now this is a key one because it releases a signal called MMP9 into the bloodstream that can directly cause blood-brain barrier permeability. And low-quality sleep can also contribute to a leaky blood-brain barrier. Here are some of the signs and symptoms of a leaky blood-brain barrier. So there are many potential signs and symptoms. So we have ADD, ADHD or autism, brain fog or difficulty concentrating, chronic fatigue that does not improve with rest or sleep, headaches or migraines, memory loss or other weird cognitive issues, mood disorders such as anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, peripheral neuropathy or muscular sclerosis, seizures, and also the last one there, hypersensitivity to supplements. So being very sensitive to the effects of certain supplements. I know back in the day when I used to live near a power station, which obviously emitted a lot of EMF radiation. Back then, I was actually highly sensitive to a range of supplements, and I'm sort of wondering maybe that may have caused some degree of blood-brain barrier permeability. So you can see in this diagram now how ultrasounds can damage the blood-brain barrier. So try to avoid, ultrasound exposure, even, when you're going to an airport and you're getting screened. That actual, when you walk through that machine that screens your body for harmful compounds or I guess illegal substances and things like that, or metal, things like that. Ultrasounds can, damage the tight junctions and allow certain drug molecules and allows harmful pathogens into the brain, which is not what we want. Now, what's really interesting is the amino or the neurotransmitter GABA. GABA is our primary anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. Some people notice that when they use supplemental GABA, that they get a really pronounced sedative effect, or they get a really strong anti-anxiety effect. And this is kind of like an indirect measure of your blood-brain barrier permeability, like how leaky is your blood-brain barrier. You can sort of use GABA to sort of test this. And if you get a very potent anxiolytic or sleep-inducing effect from GABA, then perhaps you might have a leaky blood-brain barrier. And in addition to this, some people that don't respond to GABA can actually increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier by using arginine or citrulline, because these have been shown to help increase the uptake of GABA into the brain, which is quite interesting. So what are some diagnostic tests to do for a leaky blood-brain barrier? I will be leaving a link down below where you can do certain blood tests without a doctor. There's a link down below to do that. It's called Let's Get Checked. So we can see that MMP9 level, or matrix metalloproteinases. This is sort of like an indirect measure of how permeable our blood-brain barrier is and can sort of contribute to this blood-brain barrier damage. So testing for high MMP in the blood can sort of disclose a patient's likelihood of a leaky blood-brain barrier. In addition, we can also do the occludin and zonulin tests, which are primarily used to help determine the lining of the gut, so the gut lining, but it can also help to indicate blood-brain barrier permeability. So definitely consider sort of conducting these tests to determine if it's sort of applicable in your situation. So now let's look at a range of strategies to help seal the blood-brain barrier and reduce its permeability. So the first compound is gelatin. So gelatin actually accelerates the healing of the blood-brain barrier. You can see in this study, it highlighted how gelatin can accelerate the healing of our blood-brain barrier. So incorporating gelatin-rich foods, a great example would be bone broth. That's a good one there. Another option we have is curcumin, amongst its many other benefits in the body. This study was titled "Curcumin Ameliorates the Permeability of the Blood-Brain Barrier During Hypoxia by Upregulating Heme Oxygenase 1 Expression in Brain Microvascular Endothelial Cells." So curcumin should be considered when constructing a blood-brain barrier protective sort of protocol. You will be seeing links to some of these herbs that I mentioned in the video description down below for where to purchase. This next study looked at blood-brain barrier dysfunction in thiamine deficient alcohol-treated rats. So alcohol in and of itself can damage the blood-brain barrier, and part of the mechanism may be due to dysfunction or a deficiency in vitamin B1, thiamine. So replenishing with thiamine can potentially help to seal the blood-brain barrier. Next up, we have vitamin D. So this study here was vitamin D deficiency increases blood-brain barrier dysfunction after ischemic stroke in male rats. So again, we really want to make sure we have sufficient vitamin D levels year round. Conducting regular vitamin D tests every 6 months at least is absolutely essential to ensure that we have no vitamin D deficiency. We simply cannot go by just how much time you spend in the sun. The best way to assess your vitamin D is through a blood test. So I'll leave a link down below. If you want to do a blood test, you'll see an option to do that down below without a doctor. This next study here was looking at one of my all-time favorite chi boosting adaptogenic herbs known as astragalus or astragalus. The key constituent astragaloside 4 attenuates cerebral ischemia reperfusion induced increase in permeability of the blood-brain barrier in rats. So astragalus extract may be able to counteract a leaky blood-brain barrier. We also have methylene blue, is a potent nootropic supplement to improve mitochondrial function. This study was titled "Methylene blue protects the cortical blood-brain barrier against ischemia reperfusion inflammation-induced disruptions. So methylene blue, although, quite rare, not many people talk about it, can actually help with strengthening the blood-brain barrier. So that's pretty much it for today. Hopefully you learned something new about the blood-brain barrier, the BBB. If you want to learn more information, check out my website. I've got some really amazing resources there, ergogenic.health. Please do follow me on Instagram as well. I've got some great content there. And if you've been enjoying my content, please do me a favor and share my channel around. I'm really trying to bring new and novel information to the health scene that not many people talk about. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.